I don't know you, but I know something about you. I know you have a voice that pops into your head when something doesn't go your way and tells you it's your fault. Maybe you didn't do well in a presentation, or said the wrong thing at a party, or were ghosted after that last date. That's usually when the voice chimes in and says something like, you're not good enough, or you're not smart enough. Or maybe you get the feeling that you just want to melt into the floor or escape. I also know you wouldn't dare share these deeply personal experiences with the person sitting next to you. These experiences, that's shame. To paraphrase Dr. Brené Brown's seminal research on shame, shame is the intensely personal and painful experience and a belief that you're inherently flawed and that if other people knew about it, you'd be rejected in some way. Shame is a universal emotion, but what you might not appreciate is it has a complex relationship with your health. As a clinical health psychologist, I work with individuals striving to improve their health, many of which with chronic medical conditions like hepatitis C, HIV, or obesity. In this work, I see how shame impacts people's lives on a daily basis. It impacts the way we view ourselves, our relationships, and our health behaviors. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 lessons my brave and honest patients taught me about the interrelationships between shame and health. However, I'm going to illustrate it with something far more personal, my own experience with shame. So let me paint this picture for you. It's 2016, and I'm at the doctor for an exam. But not just any exam, a pelvic exam. For the 48% of the audience that doesn't have the privilege of experiencing this treasure trove of shame, it's about as fun as a testicular exam, but usually takes longer, requires more equipment, but less coughing. But this also wasn't just any pelvic exam. It was for intermittent pelvic pain, meaning in preparation for the exam, I had to give a detailed sexual history, and I was also given an adult coloring book version of both a naked woman and a vagina. I needed to shade in the parts that hurt. Cool. So I wore my pelvic exam vest for the occasion, a button-down shirt, cardigan, statement necklace, and paper skirt provided by the hospital. Now, it took a fair amount to get to this point. About a month or so earlier, I was at my annual exam with my primary care provider when she asked about changes in my health. And I paused because there was this thing that had been bothering me, but I didn't want to have to mention it. So my mind starts to do the thing it does when I experience shame. I think, it doesn't happen that often, or it isn't that bad. My brain comes up with all sorts of reasons to not say something. I get that growing feeling in the pit of my stomach. My heart starts to race a little bit. Because here's the thing about shame. Listening to shame can silence your healthcare options. So what are my options here? I could keep my mouth shut and not say a thing, but at what cost? I'm still going to have this discomfort, and then on top of that, I'm going to be more worried that something more serious is wrong with me. Or I could go home and Google it, but let's be honest. That's a rabbit hole that usually ends in some sort of life-threatening diagnosis, little sleep, and an asking for a friend post on a message board somewhere. Or I could tolerate the discomfort that comes with this conversation. Sure, I might feel ashamed in the short term, but chances are I'm not the first person to have this conversation with my medical provider. And it's the only way I can find out what's actually going on and the best ways to treat it. Luckily, there are strategies for navigating these kinds of conversations with your medical providers. The first step is awareness. When you're discussing your health and you notice your brain starting to chime in with all sorts of don't say this or keep your mouth shut, check in to see what's driving those thoughts. It could be shame. Shame often pops up when you're butting up against some sort of moral or cultural expectation. So some people might experience shame regarding conversations about their sexual practices, their sexual health, their weight, their substance use, or their mental health. Knowing your own personal shame zones can help you make more conscious decisions about the information you're sharing with your provider. And also, check in with your goals and values. What brought you to the doctor in the first place? If the answer is to be more comfortable, then will you really be more comfortable if you don't say something? And also, people don't go to the doctor to be more comfortable. People generally go to the doctor to improve their health in some way. So how is you keeping your mouth shut on these issues improving your health? And if you don't feel comfortable sharing these issues with your medical provider, it might be worth getting a new one. In Cleveland, you can't walk out the front door without running into somebody who knows somebody who works in the healthcare field. So talk to somebody you trust and find out what providers they trust. A good patient-provider relationship can really ease challenging conversations. So anyways, back to that exam room in that lovely paper skirt. Turns out I had the privilege of having an OBGYN resident assisting in my exam that day. Great, more hands in more places. So the resident goes to complete the exam and thinks she feels a polyp. So back and forth, attending, resident, attending, resident, attending. And then the attending announces to the room that the resident wasn't feeling a polyp, but was in fact palpating the dorsal side of my rectum. I immediately wanted to melt into the floor. I'd reached shame level 75 here. Here I am, a woman living in a culture that places value on my body, my fertility, and sends me complex messages about sex. In an exam that touches on all of these different shame zones. And now this happens. What are my options? Lesson number 2, the easy fix can be hard on your health. So option number 1, quickly put on my pants and run, not walk out of that exam room, not turn around, not talk to the doctor about my treatment options. And when this comes up with my primary care provider in the future, I'm not gonna say anything. This didn't pan out for me. Or option number 2, I could go home and have a glass of wine or 3. But if I tend to cope with shame through alcohol, substances, or eating my big shame feelings, where will that leave me? Here too, the behaviors we use to cope with shame can impact our health. And unfortunately, many of the strategies we use to avoid shame only bring on more of it. So then, not only would I be feeling ashamed about the exam, I'm also likely to feel ashamed about the way I'm coping with it, which can create a difficult cycle of shame. This also means that regardless of the etiology of your shame, if you find escape through substances or food and your shame is chronic, your health is likely to be impacted. If taken to the fullest extent, we're currently in the midst of an opioid epidemic that the CDC says is fueling a 15-year high in the number of cases of hepatitis C diagnosed in 2017. These are largely fueled by IV drug use, but are disproportionately being diagnosed in individuals 30 years of age and under. But you don't have to go down this destructive path. There are other options. You could say something. See, when you stumble into a shame zone, your mind begins to develop inaccurate and unhelpful thoughts about the situation. And if you don't talk to somebody, these thoughts are like yelling in an echo chamber. So the inaccurate stories you tell yourself go unchallenged and get perpetuated. So as much as every fiber in my being wanted to do the opposite, I knew what I needed to do. I sat down with my doctor and I talked about what was causing the discomfort and what my treatment options were. And then I promptly left and called my brother, who's also my best friend, who then promptly ignored my call and tried to FaceTime me while walking through a major medical center. However, when we were finally able to connect, I told him about what happened. And he reminded me that it wasn't me, and that in that moment, my body was just doing exactly what it was intended to do. And that helps reduce a little shame. It made it easier for me to tell one person, and then another, and then a room full of strangers who will eventually post it on YouTube. Now, I realize this isn't the most stigmatizing scenario, but this also isn't the shame Olympics. Shame and the scenarios that trigger shame are deeply personal and vary for everyone. So let me tell you about the brave individuals who inspired me to get on the stage and tell my story to you. Lesson number 3, a little courage goes a long way when it comes to your health. Every day, I work with individuals living with HIV. A diagnosis that even in 2018 can be very stigmatizing and for some foster tremendous shame. Some of my patients elect to bear the burden of this disease alone due to concerns that telling their friends or family will ultimately result in rejection. However, those brave individuals who do disclose their status to friends or family are more likely to remain in care. And individuals who remain in medical care are more likely to be virally suppressed, or as we call it, virally undetectable. The World Health Organization recently deemed individuals who are undetectable to be unable to transmit HIV. So those brave individuals who disclose their status are more likely to remain in care, be healthier, and less likely to transmit HIV. So how do you get to that point? How do you get from a diagnosis of HIV to being able to share your story with others? One place I see this is in a support group I run for individuals living with HIV. There, I see new members disclose their status to other group members who are initially strangers. The other group members respond with compassion And this human connection, paired with education on their diagnosis, fosters empowerment and acceptance of their diagnosis. Individuals then take incrementally greater risks at disclosing their status to friends or family. I even have some individuals who readily disclose their status to friends, family, or just people in their neighborhood as a platform to discuss safer sex practices or pre-exposure prophylaxis, a once daily medication for individuals to prevent contracting HIV. So by starting small and sharing their story in a safe environment, individuals are tackling shame, improving their health, the health of their community, and reducing the spread of HIV. So here's the thing about shame. You can't control feeling shame, but you can determine if it's going to control you. So when you get that pit of your stomach feeling of shame, when you want to avoid or do anything other than talk about it, do the opposite. Find the person with whom you feel comfortable and say something. When it comes to your health, don't let shame prevent you from telling your story. Thank you.